Hi guys, welcome to the final lecture in our first unit in biology, an introduction to biology, and today we're going to talk about how we categorize living things, and that science is called taxonomy. So taxonomy and classification mean more or less the same thing. Taxons are probably groups of anything, but in our case, groups of living organisms. And you can see there's a lot of different types of organisms. Here we've just got a brief survey of some of the common butterflies of North America. You guys might have been able to see some of these this summer, or maybe they're still floating around where you are right now. They're quite beautiful, and there's a whole bunch of them. And so if you're in Japan and I say butterfly, you're going to have a very different idea about what a butterfly is, as opposed to someone from North America. And so that leads us to the question of why do we have to classify things? Why do you have to create taxonomies or taxons? Why do we study cladistics, which is another fancy word for classification? And the answer is, well, these common names just don't do justice when it comes to the needs of scientists, right? So a frog in France and a frog in Virginia are two different kinds of frogs, although those Virginia frogs have caused some problems in France. Look it up, check out the American bullfrog in France. Anyway, so we use taxonomic systems to categorize organisms. There's so far about 2.3 million species have been categorized, but that's not even close to the number of species that are out there. Okay, so if you wanted to be a biologist and get your name up in the lights, you could go find some new organism and have it named after yourself. And so again, we call this system of classification, or the science of classification, taxonomy. It's also called cladistics, and it's how we group things. And of course, humans have been grouping things for a long time. Back in the day, there's a famous guy named Aristotle. That's right, he's an ancient Greek philosopher. He came up with a lot of good ideas. One of the first things that he spoke to was what are the different types of life. And when you look out the window, Aristotle said, well, you're either a plant or an animal. And of course, that seems kind of obvious, right? You're either a plant or an animal. Of course, he didn't know anything about microbiota or the difference between fungi and plants. But that was a first effort in categorization. And then there was a guy named Carl Linnaeus, who was around in the 750s, and he came up with something called binomial nomenclature. All right, so bi means two, nomial means names, and nomenclature is a way to name things. So it's two-name naming. And what he did was he came up with these terms of genus and species to make for something called the scientific name. We call this scientific nomenclature. It's the same thing as binomial nomenclature. And so you've got two names in the biological sense, your scientific name, and they refer to your genus, which is a broad category, and your species, which is the most specific category. And of course, your scientific name is Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens. Well, we call this the Linnaean system now. It's based on this system of binomial nomenclature, the scientific name. And everything started out with just looking at organism structures to categorize them. And we would do comparative anatomy and identify organisms that seem to be closely related. That's not always the best way to figure this stuff out. There's a large complexity of life, and evolution comes up with very similar answers to the same problem. And so today we really rely on biochemical analysis to establish relationships. Anyway, long story short, we've come up with these 8 levels of the modern classification system or the modern taxonomy, right? And those 8 levels are domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, all right? So remember, there was 6 steps to the scientific method, 7 characteristics of life, and now 8 levels of the modern classification. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. How am I going to remember that, Mr. Doherty? I'll help you out in a sec. So anyway, each of these taxonomies is based on shared traits, And then similar species are grouped into a genus, right? So this is Panthera something, I forget his name, as opposed to Panthera leo, which is the lion. So here's some examples of the modern taxonomy. Here's the Panthera leo down there. Got himself a wildebeest, and the lion's taxonomy goes thusly, right? The domain is the broadest category, and these lions are eukarya. His kingdom is Animalia. His phylum is Chordata. That means he has a spinal cord or vertebral cord. Class is a Mammalia, and mammals have fur and give birth to live young. They also have mammary glands. He's carnivora. He makes a living by eating other stuff, hunting and eating. He's a felid, so he's not a bear, he's not a dog, he's not a canid, he's not an ursa. He's a felidae. He's a cat. And then within the family Felidae, his genus is Panthera. That's the big cats. And he's Leo, the king, Panthera leo. Now you can see when you compare Panthera leo to man's taxonomy, of course, we're Homo sapiens, right? We're in the domain Eukarya, which means we're made up of complex cells. We're also in the kingdom Animalia. We have a backbone, so we're Chordata. We're mammals, but we're not carnivores. Even though we might eat other things, we're actually primates, and primates are characterized by, big brains, binocular vision, opposable thumbs, some other stuff. Within primate, we're the hominids. We're the great apes that walk upright, and then within that family Hominidae, we're Homo sapiens, right? We're the wise man, and so there's some examples of the modern taxonomy, and we can come up with a mnemonic device to memorize these 8 levels. And the mnemonic is: Did King Philip come over for good soup? Right? Did King Philip come over for good soup? And of course, this refers to domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And of course, it's up to you to commit that to memory. Well, there are 3 domains. All right, so the largest category of life is domain. And there are 3 domains, and they include archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Now, both archaea and bacteria are examples of prokaryotes. They're both bacteria. In fact, archaea, the domain archaea, has 1 kingdom, Archaebacter. That's the old bacteria. Archaea means old. And then within the domain bacteria, there's 1 kingdom, Eubacter. And eu means new. So these are the new bacteria. Now the eukarya are the complex organisms with complex eukaryotic cells. And we're going to go into gory detail about what it means to be eukaryotic. But suffice it to say that bacteria are small cells that aren't very complicated, and they include the 2 domains, archaea and bacteria. And then the eukarya are the complex cells. And of course, they include animals and plants. They also include fungi, and then this one other category of life, the protistans. You've seen them. The protistans are the zooplankton and phytoplankton. Think about pond scum, and you know what a protist is. All right, we'll look at those in some detail in a second. But this is a diagram showing a cladogram, a diagram that shows relationship between these different organisms. Remember, there's about 2.3 million species identified. And there's a little diagram that includes them all. And it shows relationships and taxonomy. We're going to have a couple activities for you guys to work out some cladistics. And but before we get there, let's talk about these broad categories of life. Let's look at archaea. So, domain archaea. Archaea means ancient. In fact, this is the first life. The kingdom under archaea, 1 kingdom, it's called the Archaebacteria. And these are the first life on the planet. And when the planet started off, it was a hostile environment. The air was full of sulfuric acid, methane, ammonia. There wasn't any oxygen. And in fact, these archaebacteria are often called extremophiles because they live in bizarre places. They are unicellular. They're all unicellular. They are all prokaryotic. And they get their nutrition generally as autotrophs. That is, they make their own food, but specifically is as chemosynthetic bacteria. That's right. They don't do photosynthesis. Generally speaking, the archaebacteria are these chemosynthetic bacteria. They make methane and they eat methane, or they make sulfuric acid and they eat sulfuric acid. They live in strange places. Remember I said they're extremophiles. They love extreme circumstances, and they can be found in lots of different places. In fact, very strange places, like buried miles into the Earth's crust, or found in ice, or worse. This is an example. This is Yellowstone Park here. This is a bath. You don't want to fall in this. This is hot acid. This is one of the big thermal vents at Yellowstone National Park, and every year people get in there and die. Like last summer, somebody's dog was with him, and he ran and jumped in there, and then the guy ran and jumped in as well. Both of them died, so don't go in there. But there are bacteria that live there. They're thermoacidophiles, right? Phile means love. Philadelphia is a city of brotherly love. They're thermoacidophiles. They love hot acid. Okay, so the extremophiles, they're the domain archaea. They're the ancient bacteria. In fact, they're your great-great-great-great-great-grandpa. All life on planet Earth seems to have come from the extremophiles. And so again, ancient bacteria, archaebacteria. Well, there's also new bacteria, or the eubacteria. In fact, so the second domain is bacteria. They're also prokaryotic organisms. They're all single-celled. They're prokaryotic. They're simple. They're bacteria. And these guys can be both autotrophic and heterotrophic. In fact, when you think about photosynthesis, you probably think about plants and forests as being the primary photosynthetic contributors to the world. But the truth is, most photosynthesis on the planet is done by the eubacteria. In fact, the cyanobacteria. Cyan is a blue-green color, and the blue-green bacteria that inhabit the oceans are doing most of the world's photosynthesis. And they are autotrophs, right? Photosynthetic organisms are autotroph. They make their own food. And of course, there's also heterotrophic eubacteria. And these are some of the bacteria you're probably familiar with that cause disease, like Salmonella or E. coli or Streptococcus pyogenes. You can see a little slide up top there. If you ever have strep throat, you've got Streptococcus pyogenes. And pyo means fire. And if you have a strep infection, it looks like your throat's on fire. Of course, strep lives in your GI tract. Staphylococcus, the staph, is found on your skin. And so Staphylococcus is also another common eubacteria. And so again, these guys are unicellular prokaryotes, but they're the new bacteria. Last but not least, the third domain is eukarya. And in fact, in eukarya, we find all these complicated organisms that you're familiar with, right? So eukarya, the first kingdom we'll talk about is Protista. And when I say Protista, I want you to think about pond scum, right? So what's in your pond water? Well, you can see there's lots of amoebas, right? And amoeba are what we call zooplankton. They're animal-like. They're heterotrophic. They eat other stuff. Of course, there's also phytoplankton, and these are the plant-like protists, and you can see some down the bottom there. They're the volvox, right? So these guys are unicellular. They're eukaryotic. They're autotrophs and heterotrophs, and there's all kinds of great examples. But when I say protists, think about pond scum. So remember, the key to understanding what a eukaryote is that it is a complex cell. All right, so these are the examples of the unicellular eukaryotes, Protista, and you can see all kinds of compartmentalization here, right? This amoeba's got, it's got all kinds of little vacuoles in it, it's got a nucleus, and it's got all kinds of junk. It's got these cilia flapping around here that help feed food and allow it to move around. Same thing with these volvox, they have these internal organization, right? So eukaryotic cells, the eukaryotic domain is sort of characterized by complex cell types. All right, next in line in the domain eukarya is the kingdom fungi, right? Remember, what did the boy mushroom say to the girl mushroom? Why won't you go out with me? I'm a fungi. And so fungi are eukaryotes, and they include multicellular fungi and unicellular fungi. These guys up here are unicellular. These guys down here are multicellular. You can see these are mushroom or toadstools. And a lot of people think these things do photosynthesis. They're like plants. Wrong, totally wrong. In fact, all fungi are heterotrophs. They have to eat other stuff to get through the world. They can't make their own food. And so mushrooms are absorbing nutrients from the environment. They're decomposed, they break stuff down. Same thing's true of the yeast, right? So they are eukaryotic heterotrophs, and they can be uni or multicellular, right? And so the molds, the yeast, the rusts, the mushrooms, they're all fungi, and they can either be single-celled or multicelled. And so there you go. Next are the plants, right? You guys are familiar with plants. These guys all do photosynthesis, right? What about this guy? He's eating a fly. He's a tropical plant. He needs to get nutrients from, they have such crappy soil in the tropics, they have to take up bugs. Actually, fly traps are common to North America. I didn't know that. They're from South Carolina, I think, or North Carolina. Anyway, all plants are multicellular eukaryotic organisms, right? They're all autotrophs. They make their own food. And of course, examples are things you're commonly familiar with from your day-to-day experience, right? Mosses, ferns, shrubs, trees, flowering plants, and algae. Remember, how do these guys reproduce? Pretty much sexually, right? All right, plants have sex. Remember that. That's a test question. Okay, and to round out the domain eukarya, we have animals, right? So animals are multicellular, eukaryotic heterotrophs. That's right. All animals eat other living things to get by. That's how they get their food. And of course, the evolution of animals on planet Earth is fascinating. We start with sponges and then jellyfish, those cnidarians. Then we get to worms, insect, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, birds, right? So you guys are familiar with these organisms, and that's it. That's a very brief survey of the kingdoms of life, and that's it for Unit 1. All right, so I've got some activities here on the side for you guys to familiarize yourself with the modern taxonomy. Thank you.